What's going on, team? Welcome to the channel. Okay, so we've got a bit of a new segment here, going over tabletop chats. And before I talk about what we're going to get into today, I want to talk about why we're doing this and what is my motivation for wanting to put this out on our YouTube channel. So the main thing is when I look out into the community, you guys are the community. When I look out into the community, the main thing that I see is there is a plethora. There is a lot of content around move, shoot, communicate, medicate. Okay, it's one of those things where some people may think there's not enough out there, but I personally think if you look out into the internet, even just from a shooting perspective. And it's not to say that there won't be any shooting on the channel. There definitely will be, but from a shooting perspective, if we just two names straight off the top of my head, if we look at Lucas from T-Rex Arms, and if we look at Grand Thumb, two dudes putting out a lot of content. They're also stateside, so the ability for them to utilize, showcase, and use different weapon systems is a lot higher than what I can use down here in NZ. What that means is we have to get on a plane. That is correct. But for now, I feel like there is a huge gap for knowledge and content around gear, around conduct. And in terms of conduct, I mean conduct in the backcountry, in the field, or out in the field environment. At one end of the spectrum, we've got the kinetic nature, which is anything to do with, body armor, NVG, night vision, if you're unaware of what NVG is. Again, move, shoot, communicate, different weapon systems, different loadouts. That end of the spectrum, there's a lot of information out there. At the other end of the spectrum, if we look at hunting, if we look at going to the outdoors, or if we look at it from a prepared or tactical perspective, there's the opposite end of the spectrum where everything's gone wrong. And so if everything has gone wrong, we're in a survival situation. In the middle of that is just operating. Okay, even when you're in the military, for example, when I was out in Afghanistan, a lot of the patrolling, the day-to-day living, a lot of those skills, that's the majority of that's the 99% of what you actually do. How well you do that determines how the kinetic things go. And how well the kinetic things go, it also determines what happens when you get into a survival situation, or it prevents a survival situation coming to fruition altogether. And so for me, what I want to do is I want to get into gear, I want to get into fieldcraft, and I want to get into the different types of gear, the loadout, the way that you conduct yourself when you're out in the field environment, or out in the backcountry, or out in the bush. Or if you just want to understand how to set your gear up the best so you don't end up in a survival situation, or so that you look after yourself well enough so if you are in the military, if you do find yourself downrange, you find yourself in a kinetic environment, you have been able to look after yourself and conduct yourself at the highest level before it went loud, before it went kinetic, that when it comes time to move, shoot, communicate, you can do so at the highest level. That comes down to how well you look after yourself and how well you operate in the field environment. As an example, again, it's everybody talks about, the will to survive. Everybody likes to talk about, what's your time, your reload drill, what's your, how good is your long range shooting, how well do you understand ballistics, what's your BC, what's your loadout, where do you place your magazine, which way are they facing, how many magazines do you carry on your gun belt, how many magazines. All that shit becomes irrelevant if you haven't been able to look after yourself, if you haven't been able to look after your feet, if you haven't been able to protect yourself from the elements, if you haven't been able to sustain yourself well fed, well kept, well sheltered out in the field environment. How well you can survive, how well you can shoot, move, communicate will deteriorate drastically. Okay, and so the first video that we're going to get into is the different types of shelters. Okay, so what I'm not going to go over is what could already be out there. And so, for example, obviously we have hard standing. if we're looking at the field environment and we're looking at hard standing, we're talking about, again, if we're talking about a combative environment, if we're talking about a war zone, of course there is abandoned buildings. When we were in Afghanistan, it was the same scenario or the same situation from us. We had abandoned buildings along the Gandak Valley that we would stay in. And one of those buildings we even hardened. We went out, we put sandbags in, we put wire around the place, and it became essentially our home away from home, or I wouldn't call it an FOB by any stretch of the imaginations. Essentially it was a forward operating base, but it was one that was kind of built on the fly, and it wasn't one that we owned and we had our flag pinned to. It was just a place for us to stay if we wanted to punch out and spend more time in the valley, more time on patrol, instead of sitting in the base with thumb up bum, talking shit and going to the gym, aka actually doing our job. So when you're out, there's obviously going to be accommodation, not accommodation. When you're out and about, there is going to be hard standing. There is going to be huts potentially. Okay, here in New Zealand, it is really common. We have what's called a DOC hut, or a Department of Conservation hut. Essentially, it is a hut that is funded by and looked after by obviously everybody as a collective, but it's maintained by DOC, or what we call the Department of Conservation. They are spotted throughout the backcountry here in New Zealand, and we're really lucky. I don't know other countries that do that. It could be a really common thing. I don't know if that's a thing. Put it down below. It can be one of those things where if somebody finds themselves lost out in the backcountry, they know that potentially they can make their way to a nearby hut, and in that hut there can be basic resources like shelter, water, a fire, candles, little things like that. People often leave, I know I do it all the time, I will leave resources behind, whether it's fire starting kit, a little bit of food that I didn't eat and I know I can make it out back to the pickup point or the truck. I'll leave that in there just in case, for whatever reason, if a hunter comes in or a hiker comes in unprepared, then there's a little bit of food, or if they come in and they're wet, cold and hungry, and the last thing they want to do is struggle in front of the fire for half an hour, I'll make sure that I leave some fire starters behind. Okay, so that kind of covers off the initial shelters. Okay, obviously understanding that out there in the field environment, or even in the backcountry, there can be hard standing. That is a hut, that is a building, that is something generally man-made, or it can just be a spot that's frequented quite often, and maybe someone's made some kind of lean-to or A-frame. But again, we're looking at hard standing. I'm obviously not going to go over that. Okay, so the main stuff that we're going to be looking at today and talking about today is stuff that can go in your pack that is man-packable. I think that ties in nicely when we look at the package of shoot, move, communicate, medicate. Shoot, move, communicate, medicate. Survival, obviously this end of the spectrum. We want to look at obviously what's in the middle, looking after yourself, and that we think what ties in really nicely is going over 3 main shelter types that I'll take out into the field environment. 2 of them were 2 that I lived by during my infantry career, and then 1 of them is something I use a little bit more now as a civilian and as a hunter. They've all got their pros and cons. Let's take a look at what we're working with today. Okay team, first up, the bivy bag. I will get to stretching this out essentially and showing you guys what it is. Essentially, the bivy bag is a waterproof outer for your sleeping bag. That is the lowest level of shelter I would ever take, and it is the minimum. A common mistake I see people making, and I've said this before, is I see, you know, seasoned outdoorsmen, hunters, going out into the outdoors and taking a sleeping bag with no bivy bag. Again, especially here in New Zealand, even if it is a beautiful day, a phenomenal day, you can find yourself embracing the rainy elements and getting yourself moist. Okay, so the bivy bag, again, I would always have this as a minimum. You will go out without this. I am advising you now, if you go out in any in any environment, it doesn't matter. This will protect you from the elements more than your sleeping bag will. It also looks after your sleeping bag, and if you're laying out there on the ground, you don't have a ground mat, even if you do have a ground mat, again, we're looking at the longevity of your gear. If you're buying or spending money on a really good quality sleeping bag, then why not spend the extra money on a bivy bag to make sure that that sleeping bag lasts a long time and really performs. I've been in some environments where, again, the sleeping bag just wouldn't be enough. You cocoon yourself in this as well, and it just takes the edge off when it's really, really cold. So again, that's the bivy bag, the minimum standard that I would recommend you guys go out with. Next up, the hoochie or the fly. Okay, team, so the hoochie or the fly, this is the next step up from the bivy bag. Generally in the infantry, that's your go-to combo right there. Okay, you've got your sleeping bag inside your bivy bag, and then your hoochie for shelter going over the top. Okay, there's a few ways to Gucci up your hoochie, to Gucci up your fly. I will get into each one individually, the pros and cons. But essentially, if you don't know what a hoochie is, it is a fly that you will put up over top of you, and that way you can keep the elements out. And then small things like the dew that people don't often think about. I want to sleep out under the stars. They wake up in the morning and everything is wet. They did not account for the dew that will settle in overnight. The next bit of kit. Okay, we're getting a bit luxury here. Obviously the tent is a little bit more substantial, and it is a little bit bigger, if you can look at it there. So this tent here is the MSR Elixir 2. This is my new bad boy, my new baby, and it's the Gucci. So again, a really good combination to go to is the hoochie and the bivy, and then a step up from the hoochie. So again, you're going to be leaving this at home. This is not going to be in your pack, is the tent, and that is a decent step up in terms of shelter and protection from the elements. Okay, now let's break into them one by one and kind of take a look at the pros and cons of each one, what each one brings to the table, and then again, you know, depending on, you know, your mission, depending on where you're going, the season, the time of year, kind of starts to come into play on which shelter option you're going to go with. Okay, team, before we get into breaking each one down, I just want to drop in some weight considerations, and just to give you an idea of what we're looking at between the three different shelter types. Okay, so the bivy over here, my piece of paper, I've written it down. Okay, so the bivy we're looking at 92 grams. Obviously, to me, 92 grams is pretty negligible. You would struggle to convince me to leave this bad boy at home at 92 grams. The hoochie itself, and again, this is in a carry bag. We've got poles, pegs, and obviously nice lines coming off the hoochie or the fly. I'll get into that in a bit, but that's coming at 1.52 kg, 1.52 kg. And then again, another step up now, obviously with the tent, as you would expect, this is coming at 2.68 grams. Unsure what MSR has on the website, but I've got it on our weigh machine over there, our scale weigh machine. Very technical. Okay, so no, I'm unsure what MSR has on the website, but I'll put this on our scale, and we are looking at 2.68 kg. Okay, just to recap, 92 grams, 1.5 essentially kg, 2.7 essentially kg. Okay, let's start with the bivy. Okay, team, the bivy. So maybe in the next one, take note. Maybe we'll film in a bigger area, and I'll stand up and talk about this stuff, but kind of wanted to keep it to a tabletop chat today because it fit in the frame quite nicely. Okay, but no, a bivy will often be able to zip up completely. Your sleeping bag goes inside. For me, it lives in there. When I come back from a hunt or any sort of expedition where I'm using my sleeping bag in the bivy, I'll always have my sleeping bag out to make sure that it's not crunched up in my bivy bag 24/7, and I'm allowing the sleeping bag to maintain its loft. But anyway, when you're out in the field environment, your sleeping bag will live inside your bivy bag, and then your bivy bag and your sleeping bag together goes inside your pack. I will then do up my zip the majority of the way, but I'll leave a slight crack in the top. And the reason for that is because that definitely wasn't someone's name that this has been issued to before. I continue. Okay, and I'll leave a little crack so when I pack it down into the pack and we're cramming it in, that all the air that is trapped in the sleeping bag can escape out and it can pack down nice and small, because generally we have a lot of other gear to carry in our packs. Pros and cons. Okay, the pros of the bivy bag I think are fairly obvious. If we're looking at the bivy bag, again, it's just an outer for a sleeping bag, something that you're definitely going to be taking with you. So to protect yourself with a waterproof, windproof outer layer, and then again, just keeping all the crap off your sleeping bag, it's just a no-brainer to take it. So the pro is you're taking your sleeping bag, it's just an outer sleeve essentially that is going on your sleeping bag, so why wouldn't you take it? It comes in at 92 grams, and the cost of one of these things, depending on the quality that you're going to go for, again, you could pick one up from an army surplus store, or you could head into an outdoor store and get one from an outdoor retailer. You're going to be looking at, for a high quality one, I believe, $1 to $2, maybe even $300. But again, the $300 mark, I believe you'd be buying a pretty premium outdoor brand for that price point. The bivy bag for me is really underutilized. Again, it just keeps your sleeping bag dry. It keeps all the dirt and the crap out of your sleeping bag, which will start to break down the performance, the loft, and the longevity of your sleeping bag. So again, by using this, you're just enhancing the longevity of your sleeping bag, which is what we want. We buy a bit of kit, we want it to last a decent amount of time. If you only take your bivy bag, and some people do this, they go skint on the weight, and they're a real weight pest. You're obviously going to find issues like I found before, which is, yep, it's great, summertime, you can probably get away with taking your bivy bag, but what if it rains? What if the wind is howling? And then again, the dew. It is often very forgotten about. A lot of people think, I'll sleep under the stars, it's going to be magnificent. And at night time, it's nice and dry. Even in the middle of summer, especially here in New Zealand, it's really common. It's a beautiful summer's night, it's warm, you're up on top of the mountain or you're up on top of a hill, and you just bivy out, or you bag out without the bivy, and dew sets in and soaks everything. Now, even with a bivy bag, you've now got a soaking wet bivy bag, your face, your head could be wet, not a big deal. But again, if we're talking about longevity operating at the highest level, we want to make sure that we're looking after ourselves a lot. So my thing is this: if it was a recon task and I was carrying a crap load of 5590 batteries or 2590 batteries, can't remember the name of them, like sometimes we used to, for all the radios and gear that we're powering out there, sometimes you want to cut the weight and you want to cut the crap. And so maybe you think, I'm just going to bivvy it up out there. Okay, even then, I'd probably just take a hoochie if we're going bush. But again, if you take a hoochie and you are going bush, you often don't need to take the poles and the pegs, because you're going to be able to find adequate poles, pegs out there with the trees and everything else that's around you. You should be able to. I'll get into a little point there anyway with the hoochie. But again, that's it there. The bivy bag, obviously it's rudimentary. It will protect you and your sleeping bag from the elements, but at a very low level. You're still going to wake up in the morning probably covered in dew. That is all going to be wet. You're then going to pack that down into your pack. Now the rest of your pack is wet. Everything in and around the sleeping bag starts to get wet, and that is why, again, I am a weight pest, but I'm not that much of a pussy that I won't just carry a hoochie as well, just to make sure I keep the dew. And again, if the wind's howling in, it is nice to set the hoochie or you'll fly down nice and low, and then that way it creates a bit of a wall or a bit of a barrier and takes some of the wind off of you during the night. That is the bivy bag. Break team, I just wanted to jump on here and quickly say thank you to everybody who has got behind our New Zealand sock program. It is something that I am extremely passionate about, and I've had a lot of people jumping into my DMs and saying, Fitzy, why are you so passionate about socks? One of the things that I'm really excited about and I'm really passionate about with this project is it is a New Zealand made project. We've got the New Zealand Sock Company, which is manufacturing down in the South Island of New Zealand, and they have been for years, generational family business, working with the biggest brands in the game. And so it's an honor to be working with them and utilizing all their experience and expertise with developing high performance socks. The next company that we're working with is New Yarn. For those of you who don't know, New Yarn has innovative, industry-leading merino wool technology. And working with both of those companies, the New Zealand Sock Company and New Yarn, has been an absolute pleasure. There is one thing that people often overlook, and when people are investing in equipment and gear, they often always look at the big picture stuff, whether it's, if we're looking at packs, sleeping bags, tents, shelters, rain jackets, all those sorts of things, but often overlooked is the sock. And I can tell you now, from my experience as a young infantryman, I learned this lesson the hard way. I had blisters that are absolute war stoppers. And it is one of those things where a decent blister, or just blisters in general, they really do ruin your day, and it is not good for morale. And so the New Zealand Sock program, the goal there is to make high quality, performance focused socks that perform as hard as you do. And I'm really excited about the tactical training sock because it does just that. It's now become my go-to sock for any given day of the week. Whether I am walking down the street, whether I'm coming into the office, whether I'm in the gym, or whether I'm in the backcountry wearing boots, the tactical training sock has been my go-to sock now. And so for everybody who's got behind this project and supported, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate it. The next sock in the program is Danger Close. It is the Merino Mission Sock. The Merino Mission Sock has been produced to be a high performance boot sock, and it has been strategically designed for that exact use case there, which is being used for extended periods of time whilst wearing boots. The tactical training sock, broad spectrum use, still performs really well, but I am really excited, obviously given my background in the military, to bring out the Merino Mission Sock, which is our dedicated boot sock. If you haven't checked it out, head to the website, have a look under accessories, and you will find the tactical training socks there where you can learn more about them. I would appreciate it if you just went and had a look and get back and tell me what you think. Crack on with the video. Thank you. Okay, the hoochie. Let's get into the hoochie. So the hoochie is a good bit of kit. If you looked at it, it's right in the middle there with the weight. It's essentially 1.5 kg. That's with poles and pegs. And I've got some extra long guide ropes or tie down ropes, whatever you want to call it, just to make sure that, again, if I didn't take my poles and I knew I was going to be staying in the trees, if I got to a area that I deemed suitable for a campsite, I've just got extra long ropes on them to make sure that they can reach trees if they were really far away. It is pretty hard to fault the hoochie. It is a great bit of kit. Most soldiers are issued it, and you can pack it down a lot smaller than this. Again, if I'm in the army, depending on what pack setup I've got, and I've got the nice tubular pockets on the side of my pack, then you can even forget if you really want to pinch weight, you can get rid of the carry bag and you can just pack up your hoochie nice and small with some rubber bands, or you could use bungee cord or some kind of elasticated cord to pack this down nice and small and scrunch it up even smaller. The main point that the main reason I wouldn't take a hoochie would be down to going to the alpine environment or going to a high wind environment. Again, with good pegs and good knots and everything, you can rig these things up and they can handle a lot of stuff, but there is nothing worse. You ask any soldier, there is nothing worse than waking up in the middle of the night and hearing this thing flapping around, and you can hear that one corner's come loose, or someone, you know, if you're in a platoon harbour, some geezer's come past and he's kicked your hoochie peg and it's now come out and you've got one corner flapping away, or you wake up in the middle of the night and it's, for whatever reason, the hoochie or the fly's bouncing down off your face. It's just not a good time. Again, if you set it up correctly, you shouldn't have those issues, but I have found in high wind environments or more extreme weather, that is where the tent really comes into play. Obviously, the tent is a more robust structure. It's got poles. That's the main thing there, right, team, is it's got the poles. The tent itself can be fully closed in. The hoochie, you can set it down really low, but again, the wind can still be ripping in underneath. Where I have just found, when you get into a tent and there is a lot of wind around and there is a lot of shitty weather around, the tent really starts to stand head and shoulders above the fly and the hoochie. But there are things you can do to Gucci up, we'll call it, to Gucci up your hoochie. And again, it's going to depend on what scenario you'll find yourself in. So, obviously now being a civilian, I'm not too worried about the tactical side or the tactical setup of my hoochie, but I still care about being squared away. So, 9 times out of 10, when you get issued a hoochie, when you get issued even a tent, sometimes the pegs just aren't that robust. And so I've had these for years. I've had them since my military career, and it is just a much heartier, stronger, sturdier peg. And I'll take these bad boys out, and it doesn't matter if I am in an area where there's tussock, or I'm in an area where there's a lot of rock, or I'm in an area where there's sand. These pegs do really well. So again, 9 times out of 10, if you go down to your local outdoor or hunting store, you're going to find a fly, you're going to open it up, and it's going to have these crappy little pegs in there, probably made from stainless steel, and especially if you're in sand and the likes, those things just get ripped out literally with a little blow, with a little, those pegs will come out. Okay, so that's the first upgrade I recommend you make to your hoochie or your fly. I'm just calling it a hoochie. You know now a hoochie is a fly. The next thing is the poles. Okay, so with the poles, obviously someone has done half an effort here. Sort it out, Fitzy. Okay, someone has done half an effort here to tactical up the poles. What I would go the extra mile and do if I was in some sort of recon unit, or I was in the infantry, or I was in a special forces unit, and I wanted to be elite in my setup. No, what I would do is same thing, is you literally tape it up, and it does take a bit of the, but it's still, as you can see, there's a lot of ring there. So what we used to do, what I used to do when I was in the infantry, and this was passed on to me by a very squared away section commander, my first section commander that I had in the infantry, was we would get bike tube. So you go down to your local bike shop, you ask them if they have any bike tube that they are not using. 9 times out of 10, they will have bike tube that they are not using. And it's just going to go in the bin and go to waste. So head down to your local bike shop, ask them for some bike tire. It should be for free. Just stuff they're going to throw out. And then again, you do the same thing. You get the tape, but underneath the tape, you put bike tubing. Again, cut the bike tube so it's nice and thin. It's like a piece of tape. Wrap it round, tape it off, and then tape the whole thing up. So that'll be bike tube. Yep, you're going to add a little bit of weight, but instead of the knocking and clanging, that's gone. When you use the bike tube, that is gone, and that is what we're looking for. Again, for you young bucks out there who are holding it down in the infantry, that is what we're looking for there. Another thing is setting your hoochie up in darkness. This can be a very common thing that you'll find yourself doing in tactical environments, okay? And so what I would do is set it up in a way which is like this. So I know that piece goes there, and I know, yep, we got it right, that piece goes there. Again, yep, again, I potentially got this hoochie for free, so I won't complain about that. But there you go, weak aluminium poles. Okay, so all you're gonna do is get a piece of cord, decent cord, a little bit of paracord. Make sure there's enough slack in it so that you can actually pull this off. Don't do it too tight. So there's enough slack in it so you can do that. And then you have a length of paracord going from here to here. That way, when you pack down under darkness, or when you're setting up your shelter for the night under darkness, you're not looking for each piece in the right piece. You pull it out. It's essentially almost like a pair of nunchucks, and you can just clip them together in darkness without needing any light, or without worrying, is this the right piece, is that the wrong piece? That is another great tip that I was taught when I was a young infantryman, and I recommend you do the same. The last thing to do, okay, this is what I've just done recently. Essentially, go down to your local hardware store and you should be able to find some decent coils of paracord. That's what this is. This is black paracord. And I have just seen, especially ones that you buy straight from the shop, flies, even outdoor, like decent outdoor flies, or decent brands, relatively decent brands. They just put these cheap, nasty guidelines on these, and they just don't last long, and they're shit. They are shit. So again, you're going to add a little bit more weight, but at the same time, these are strong lines. If you find yourself in that survival setting, you now have a whole lot of rope at your disposal if you had to build something. And again, I've just put decent lengths on here. I think, I can't remember the exact, I think I've put 5 meters potentially on the corners, and then 10 meters on the main lines. So the main lines, if you think about a house like that, it's the lines coming off the ridge. The reason for that is, again, if you find yourself in a relatively spaced out area, but there are still trees around, and you want to keep these packed away, you don't want to use them, or you didn't take them at all, then again, you know with those big long lines that even if the trees are spread apart, you're going to be able to set this up nice and easy, without sitting there playing the game of, I need to move camp 10 times until I find an area that fits this in and that my lines can reach and tie off nicely. So again, bit of paracord, roughly 5 meters on each corner, and then maybe 10 meters could be overkill, but even 7 meters on your main guides is a great way to go to set your hoochie fly up, being hardcore. Okay, last but not least, definitely not least, it's my new favorite, and I don't mind carrying it now. Okay, it is the MSR Elixir 2. I've pretty much covered off when explaining the hoochie where this comes into play, and it is when you are looking at more adverse weather conditions. That is where the tent really does start to come into play. Again, you can have absolutely hissing wind, really bad driving rain, and I've just found you carry this bad boy up, you're carrying the extra weight, 2.7 kg I think it was, but you find yourself a lot more comfortable within the elements. It keeps the wind out, it keeps the driving rain out, and it is just a whole lot better than being out in a bivvy or in a hoochie when you are in those adverse weather conditions. And so again, the tent, it is coming in a lot more expensive. I believe this tent was at retails at around 800 NZD, 800 New Zealand dollars. I will chuck up on here what that converts to in American dollars. A good fly, again, you are going to pay a couple of $100 for, potentially. If you buy a decent fly or a decent hoochie, you are going to pay a couple of $100 for it. So again, this is a drastic increase or spike in the amount of money that you're going to be spending. So that is something to consider in. What is your budget? And that's where the bivvy and the hoochie combination is really good bang for buck. But again, if you can afford it and you are going into places where you are looking to deal with more extreme weather conditions or elements, then again, you're going to be a lot more comfortable, and you're going to be a lot more comfortable, and you're going to find yourself enjoying life a whole lot more when you get to crawl inside this bad boy at the end of your day. And that is a factor when you are out there. keeping morale high is important. And so I have found that when you've got your tent, you can bring everything inside, everything gets out of the elements. Very similar in the hoochie, but for whatever reason, rain's coming in sideways and whatnot, then things still seem to get pretty wet under the old hoochie. But the tent, it is a modern luxury, and if you have the budget, and again, you're going into the mountains and all the rest of it, then I definitely recommend you take it. Okay team, one point I will add is, obviously you can see this is not packed up the best. And I normally carry it under my top flap, but again, what you can do is you can just go get yourself a couple of Velcro straps or a couple of links of Velcro, or you can get yourself some bungee cord to cinch that up and make it a whole lot smaller. Or a dry bag is another option that I've been looking at, which is packing everything down into a nice dry bag, and then carrying the poles separately outside of that, and then you're going to get that tent a whole lot smaller. But at the moment, again, I'm not trying to be tactical anymore, so this red bag, I don't mind having it under my top flap. So there you have it team, there are your 3 shelter options for going out into the field environment. Okay, just recapping off, bivvy would be your absolute minimum. The bivvy and the hoochie, or the bivvy and the fly, is a great combination and will get you through most stuff. It really will. Then leading on from that, I would still take my sleeping bag inside my bivvy, and then you've got the tent, which is that step up in luxury and comfort. But again, if you're going out there hunting, if you're going out there in the field environment, and you can, and I've seen them, multicam tents out there now. If you're going out there for an extended period of time and you want to operate at the highest level, that means looking after yourself. That means making sure you look after yourself, you look after your gear, because if you look after your gear, it looks after you. And so if your gear is living inside a tent for 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time, so you go on a big expedition or a big hunt, again, wherever in the world you are, I know in America you can spend a lot of time out hunting, out in the hills. And so again, if you're out there for an extended period of time, you and your gear are better looked after from the elements and from the creatures and the predators and the critters that are out there if you're inside a tent. And you are going to be traveling lighter. There's a good bit of flexibility with it. There's a multitude of ways that you can set this up, even in the heat. You can set the hoochie up a few different ways just to keep the sun off you. So it is really nice, but then you could still be sitting there, whether you're in an OP or whether you are just glassing for animals, or whether you're just chilling out for the day and you're having a rest day in between legs on your expedition or mission. So again, if you've got any questions, queries, bump them down below and I'll get into it. The next video that I'm going to be putting out is on the different types of navigation, the pros and cons of each one, and pretty much exactly what I use when I'm going out into the backcountry and I'm looking to drop out of service, or looking to at least have no coverage for some aspects of the hunt, mission or expedition, and then again what tools that I'm using to navigate. So team, this is some of the stuff that we're going to be working on. It's going to be a mix between here and actually being out in the field. Again, if you would like to see this kit set up in the field environment, I don't mind doing another video, setting up the hoochie or the fly, going over it, setting up the tent, and then again going over the tent, the layout, how I set it up, and kind of how much room is actually in a tent, like the MSR Elixir 2. That is all team. I hope you got some value from today's video. Again, I want to keep filling your toolbox to ensure that when you go out in the backcountry, when you go out on a mission or an expedition, that you are thriving out there, you are not surviving. So again, by taking this stuff seriously, by really getting into setting up your gear, and that is going the extra mile, that is taping up the poles, that is replacing poor, average or weak or low quality guidelines or ropes, tie down points with high quality paracord. It's when you cut the paracord, it's getting a lighter out, it's singeing off the ends. It's doing all of these little things really, really well, enables you to thrive instead of just surviving. And when you are thriving, the chances of you ending up in a real survival situation, not geographically embarrassed, we've all been there, But in a real survival situation, we're really starting to reduce the risk of that actually even happening in the first place. If you are still serving in some capacity in the military, again, if you take your field gear, or we call it FSMO, if you take the setup of your pack, your webbing, your rifle, your body armor, your entire setup, all your gear, when you take it seriously, not just your gun, okay? Because your gun is one thing. You can be the hottest dick on the range, and you can be phenomenal. But what are you like 2, 3, 4 weeks out in a real field environment when you are dealing with real adverse weather, terrain, sleep deprivation, potentially a lack of resupply? All of these things come into fruition in the military. And again, the better you look after yourself, the greater chance of success of you performing when you need to, surviving, or missing the survival scenario altogether because your gear is that well set up and you're that well equipped that you have been able to look after yourself for extended periods of time and still maintain yourself and your being in relative peak physical condition. That is all, team. Fitzy